10 years on, the mysterious death which outraged and disheartened many and made Teo Beng Hock the most striking subject of Malaysia's death in custody. He exposed the brutality in Malaysia's bureaucracy and darkness in the country's judiciary with his blood and life. Sadly, he was not the first nor the last to die of injustice. SORM statistics show that 1,096 cases of lockup deaths occurred in the country between 2014 and 2018, and this number did not include the many unreported cases. Malaysia cheered the advent of New Malaysia post-GE14, but have we really achieved a new Malaysia that is fair, free, and safe for all? Have all the blood and tears stopped flowing behind the gates of our lockups?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to On the Hot Seat tonight. First of all, let's welcome our guest tonight, YB Ram Kapal Singh, and also Melissa Sasidaran from Lawyers for Liberty. Welcome you both. I think while today is the 10th anniversary of the passing of Beng Hock, but apart from the case of Beng Hock's case, I think what we really need to explore and talk about tonight is perhaps death in custody in Malaysia. I don't know, but to both of you, because we just have a case where a Nigerian student was found dead or in the custody of our immigration department. In general, do you think, in terms of custody, death in custody, things has been better
compared to
okay,
previous administration?
Yes, previous administration.
Well, I think I mean, my personal view is not really. I don't think there's been much improvement. There can be, and there's a lot of room for improvement, that's for sure. And you know, I think the latest case of the Nigerian, which you have just mentioned, again highlights this very dark part of our administration that needs to be addressed. You know, our agencies need to be supervised, monitored independently, I think, so that these things can be reduced in their rates. The Nigerian case, you know, he was arrested, kept in custody, you know, to verify his details, I believe,
Yes.
which were completely unnecessary, I feel. You know, and what happened in that period when he was detained, of course, it's under investigation at this point of time, so perhaps it's too early to comment on that part of it yet. But certainly, you know, I think an independent third party or an independent body should investigate the circumstances of his death. And that is what is sorely missing, I think, in this country at this point of time.
Okay, we'll come back to that. The independent body who should investigate this matter. But Melissa, what do you have? What's your thought on this? Are things better compared to the previous administration?
Like Ram has said, statistically, if you're talking about statistics, you know, one death in custody is just one too many. But if you look purely at the numbers, of course, you can see a difference in you know, the previous Malaysia Lama and Malaysia Baru, because in the last few years, especially if you look at the last, say, 5 years, I think the number of death in custody, and I'm just talking about death in custody in police detention, because there's the police detention, death in custody, there are death in custody in prisons, and there are also death in custody in immigration, as the recent case, and that's a black hole that, you know, has not really been talked about much. But purely on death in custody in police, which, you know, we handle many of such cases, statistics have gone down. Whether that is purely because you know, the authorities are much more careful post elections with a change of government, and perhaps, you know, it's also in conjunction with, maybe coincidentally, there are better monitoring system in place. For example, CCTV. Perhaps that's why the numbers are down, or perhaps, you know, sometimes cases go unreported because it doesn't come to media attention. Maybe the families are not as aware of their rights, because a lot of cases, when you talk about numbers alone, these are cases that manage to come to the public knowledge, but those that does not, we don't know. So I mean, of course, we can take probably some positive from the reduced number in terms of police brutality. I think that's for sure we are hearing less of it, hopefully for the better. But deaths because of illnesses, because of diseases that they contract from detention centers or in prison, that's still quite worrying. And I think that hasn't been dealt with by the authorities, even in Malaysia Baru.
So I think interesting that you pointed this out, because I think we should remind our audience as well. Death in custody doesn't mean it has to be police brutality. It could be like an inadequate condition when they were detained. But I think certain things should be done in terms of this, right? Like access to proper health care. How are things now? I mean, like how are these detainees? Are they being accorded with the proper health care? What is the situation now?
I'll give you a very recent example. Actually, we just recently, about a month and a half ago, we had a death in Sungai Buloh, a detainee at Sungai Buloh prison.
Okay.
He died of TB, a disease which he contracted in prison, and he's not even he has not been convicted of any crime yet. He's a remand detainee, meaning he was there because he could not pay bail. So what happened was, he had been ill for some time, and his family visits him very, very often in prison, and they have regularly, he has regularly informed his family that he is, ill, but and he's been coughing, and of course, being roughened up in prison or in any detention center is unfortunately not uncommon. So that's in addition to his illness. But one day he was just brought to the hospital, to Sungai Buloh Hospital, and he died 2-3 days later. And it was only at the hospital where he was brought, at a very critical stage, where the hospital diagnosed him with TB, meaning no one was aware he had TB, even though he had been ill for a long, long time. And according to his family, he actually brought it up to the detainee who died, actually brought it up with the prison wardens. But as in most cases, what we see is they tend to self-medicate. So for all illnesses, regardless of what you have, there's a lack of apathy, so all they give you is Panadol. They don't care whether you are seriously ill or not. Your cure-all is Panadol, and beyond that, just don't complain. Be grateful for that.
Self-medication, I was like, how do inmates or detainees actually self-medicate? So it's like
they're given just
one solution for everybody.
Yes, one solution. It's just Panadol. So he had been continuously ill, and by the time he was admitted to hospital, clearly it was so critical that he died 2-3 days later. And the hospital, when they did the post-mortem, they said that it had just spread all over to his heart, to his brain. He just could not be safe. But TB is an illness that can be easily treated.
Yes,
easily detected. The minute there is coughing, and in Sungai Buloh prison, it's an illness that is prevalent and it's known for many, many years.
But I understand that there's a new system which was shared recently, saying that whoever that has been detained has to inform the authority of the condition. They have to fill in this form telling people that, so how they will be treated differently, where they should be detained. Is this put into practice?
So when this detainee, his name was Purushothaman, when he was brought into prison, and when he died, the prison authorities said that when we brought him in, what happens is prisoners are normally screened. They have a health screening. And they found nothing. But this just proves our point that he contracted the disease in prison. So why wasn't adequate health care accorded to him then? In fact, Suhakam, our National Human Rights Commission, have actually done, because they have access to detention centers, and they have done an in-depth report on this. It's really long, and they have, TB and other infectious diseases have been known for many years.
TB is quite common.
Yes, it's quite common, and in fact, I've been told that the treatment is actually free in Malaysia.
It is.
So, why was this is an entirely preventable death? So it's just tragic that this happened.
Same. I had another. I know of another case where the boy contracted it in prison. So obviously, their condition is they're fine when they go in. They pass the tests, the screenings and whatnot. But they come out in different conditions. So how do you? So who's to blame there? If there's any blame that needs to be pinned, it has to be on the prison authorities. So that obviously shows that the treatments that they have might not be sufficient or adequate. There are others with more serious conditions like HIV. That is also, I wouldn't say common, but there are cases of prisoners with HIV, and as you know, for those suffering from HIV, they need constant medical care, and so these things ought to be made more easily available to prisoners. I think, which unfortunately, I think at this point of time, is not up to mark.
Not there yet. Okay, these are the cases where it's about inadequate condition. What about in cases of foul play, or maybe in cases of police brutality? How are these cases being investigated if there's a death?
Well,
whoa. I think I have opened some Pandora box.
You can start.
There were a number of high-profile police brutality cases previously. For example, the case of Damendran. He was found with multiple bruises all over his body, including staple marks. Why was there staple found in his ears? And there was an EAIC inquiry and all that, and subsequently several policemen were charged, but they were acquitted. So, I mean, when it comes to death in custody, there tends to be a culture of cover-up. So you're talking about lodging a police report with the police who are responsible for the death. At the very least, these detainees were under their care. And when a death in custody happens, we have seen in many instances where records, for example, the diary of the lockup has been altered in order to cover up. Or we see, for example, if you do a post-mortem, the first instance in most of our cases have not been the actual reason why a person dies in custody. For example, there are multiple bruises, so clearly this person died because of brutality.
Yes, that's true.
But the reasons stated are sometimes, heart attack, or liquid found in lungs, or even in, for example, Karunaniti case, which has been widely publicized. It was of fatty liver change. Nobody even knows what that means. It's only after insisting on a second post-mortem that then, a more accurate report comes out, where they say that this person died due to multiple blunt force trauma. So even on the hospital, on the pathologist side, of course we're not blaming everyone, but there needs to be there cannot be a culture of cover-up where you're trying to help out the police. And when you investigate or do a post-mortem on these cases, you have to take into account the circumstances of how this person died. Not just, okay, this person may have had existing health issues, say asthma, but that surely is not the cause of death when a person comes in with multiple injuries on the body. So, but we don't see an honesty in the report that they produce, at least at the first instance.
This report produced post-mortem.
Yes.
This post-mortem
Yes.
reports that you're mentioning
Yes.
Okay. So.
There must be, obviously when somebody dies suspiciously, in custody, when a person is brought into custody, the first thing to note is that whoever who takes him into custody has a duty of care to that person. So if you look at it from that angle, if you are a prisoner, you could be on remand, you could be on death row. It doesn't make a difference. You are in custody, and your custodian has to take care of you, to put it bluntly. He has that duty of care. So if a person dies suspiciously, in the lockup or in prison, then that person, that custodian, has to explain it. So that they normally come up with a post-mortem report, like Melissa has just told you.
Yes.
I think I agree with her. A lot of times, you find a second post-mortem report completely contradicts the first. A lot of times. So all these, a lot of times you find, suspicious circumstances of death in the second post-mortem report. And these things show quite obviously cover up. So as far as we are concerned, a lot of people who, since, I don't know if my statistics are correct, I think you probably know, be able to correct me if I'm wrong. You have, since 2010, close to 2,000 death in custody cases in this country. That's a lot. And that's up to 2017, I think. Not even 10 years, 9 years. So you're looking at about, 150 odd death in custody cases a year, on average. That's a lot. That's a very, very high figure. Of course, that was during the BN time. I'm not saying, pointing the finger at them or anything like that. We have come in now for a year, so it remains to be seen whether this trend continues in the long term. I think, you have to give it some time to see whether or not, to answer your initial question at the beginning, whether or not things have changed in the new administration. I think it's a bit too early to tell. Because this is a phenomenon which you can only judge after a period of time, so after perhaps 5 years, then if you see the figures really dropping, or the average death in custody cases dropping from, say, the 150 that we have now to maybe, I don't know, half of it, then you can confidently say that there are
things has improved.
Improvements. So I think when it comes to deaths in custodies, I always look at it suspiciously. We start off that way.
Yeah. Okay, Melissa, you mentioned that, when it comes to post-mortem report, there's a lot of cover-up involved. Are there any recommendations in terms of the system or in terms of how it's being done currently that needs to be improved or needs to be implemented,
I think,
from your point of view?
Well, first and foremost, everyone needs to understand what are their role, what is the role they play. Covering up or helping another enforcement agency and so on to mask the truth is not the solution, because you're just reinforcing and perpetuating the problem. We have always stressed that when a pathologist conducts a post-mortem, they have to always take into account the circumstances of the case. And how they do that is by asking questions to the police.
Okay.
They need to find out, they need to do a bit of investigating what actually happened, how was the condition of this person when he went into detention, what happened there, were there any beatings, and this would naturally, the questions would correspond with whatever things that they could find on the body. So based on that alone, I think if there was honesty and a bit more effort put into finding out what actually happened, that would help them to produce a more accurate post-mortem report that the family can use to obtain their justice in whatever way they want to.
Are these reports being audited?
No.
Audited meaning?
Is there any independent party that sometimes randomly check these reports and see whether it's done
Not to my knowledge.
No, but if you're unhappy with it, you can always request for a second postmortem.
Is
and
it
if
easy
you're not,
to access to a second postmortem?
it's not, because obviously there will be pushbacks. So in our cases, it's only because people have representation to lawyers that they are able to push the authorities or the hospital to conduct a second postmortem. But if generally medical practitioners, as with lawyers, if you're unhappy with the particular action of a particular person, you can always there's a complaints mechanism that you can do to their own respective professional bodies.
I think something to note from that is those who are, if I may use the word, weak, or don't have access to the poor, perhaps, who don't have access to legal representation. They are vulnerable to be victims of such cover-ups, because they don't have the luxury of that second post-mortem and so on. So a lot of these cases prey on the weak, I think.
Okay. I think in Bang Hok's case, right, I think most of us who went through it could always remember what happened at the inquest. So after the inquest, people has been talking about the role of the inquest court. How do you think that, with the current system, right, what is the role of an inquest court? Because we were delivered with a verdict of open verdict in the case of Bang Hok. I think there were judges subsequently saying that shouldn't be the case. So what happened to cases after that?
An inquest is not to find anybody guilty or not. It is the purpose of an inquest is to determine the cause of death behind somebody's death. So, for example, in Teo Beng Hok's case, there was an inquest that was held in Shalam,
yes, that's
Magistrate Court, and that went on for quite a while. I think a great number of witnesses were called, close to 100, I believe,
yes.
or in excess of 100. Postmortems, medical experts were called to come up with the cause of death, and of course there were conflicting versions, conflicting evidence. That's normal. So the purpose of that inquest is, like you say, the magistrate court came up with an open verdict that went up to the High Court. The High Court agreed with it, with the inquest findings, and then that went up finally to the Court of Appeal, which overturned it. So the Court of Appeal, comprising of 3 judges.
Yes.
Now one of them is our speaker now, Justice Muhammad Arif. He chaired that panel in Teo Beng Hok. I think in all of them, in no uncertain terms, if you look at the judgment, very clearly said, look, there is evidence of foul play here. It's very suspicious. And I think the words that were used in the judgment were, there are people known or unknown responsible for his death, possibly MACC officers. So of course they can't, I mean, the Court of Appeal is not an investigative body. It's not their job to go and investigate and find out who did it and so on. But what they were saying is, look, go and investigate. There is something here. So coming back to your question, the purpose of an inquest is not to find anyone guilty. That's not the purpose of an inquest. The purpose of an inquest is to determine the cause of death. I think that the model, the Dutch model.
The coroners?
Was what's her name? Do you know?
Dutch model. Ah, okay, sorry.
Oh yes.
The
Dutch
other
girl.
case which you found.
I think that was an open verdict as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, to determine the cause of death.
But an open verdict, as we have all seen in Teo Beng Hok's case, is just so incredible how they even, how the court could even come up with an open verdict at the face of, such mounting evidence. Of course, like I hold the opinion that the Court of Appeal decision was the right one. They clearly state that, there were persons responsible for the death and accelerated the death, including MACC officers. Now, what next to do from there? The court has recommended too. They have recommended that the police go investigate now. They have all the evidence, and these are evidence collected through so many years. You had an inquest, you had a review hearing, you had an RCI. At the face of such enormous amount of evidence, the police should reopen investigations in a very thorough, transparent, and open manner.
Which they did. They did to a certain extent, but not, what we would have wanted. They did set up a task force.
Why a task force?
Well, after last year's elections, there's always been calls for reopening of investigations into Teo Beng Hock's case,
Yes,
even
that's
before,
true.
from before,
Yes.
during BN's time.
Yes.
So after the Pakatan came in, then obviously, that sort of like those demands were taken more seriously, and a task force was set up for the purpose. After the Attorney General was appointed in July last year, he also backed this. He backed this calling for reinvestigations. He asked the previous IGP Fuzi to do so. So they did, and then the Home Ministry, headed by Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, he announced in Parliament in November last year, during the budget sitting in November, that a special task force had been formed, and they had reinvestigated the case. They had come up with findings which had been forwarded to the Attorney General. So the Attorney General now has the power, to look at those findings, to send it back, to make the necessary directions. So that's the stage we are at this point of time. Of course, as you know, in Teo Beng Hock, the Attorney General has asked the matter to be investigated under Section 342, which is an offence for wrongful confinement.
Yes.
I certainly I don't agree with that, but at the same time, having said that, I think it doesn't necessarily mean that just because investigation papers have been opened under a certain section, in this case 342, that it would necessarily end in a prosecution of that section. The investigation can cover other offences as well, right? So you can have a situation where a person is wrongfully confined and ends up being murdered as well. So you can have multiple offences being investigated at the same time. So I think in the case of Teo Beng Hock, we have had some progress, but perhaps not, to the extent that we would have liked at this point of time.
Okay, I know that this is about reinvestigating the case, but you have seen an inquest court that we have more than 100 witness, in excess of 100 witness, like YB has mentioned. Do we still need a fresh investigation?
My view is this, I think if you look at Teo Beng Hock's case, you see, in Teo Beng Hock's case, the identities of the officers are known. You see, it's not like, say, Altan Tuya's case.
Yes.
In Altan Tuya's case, for example, the identities of the individuals who ordered the murder of Altan Tuya, who would have had a motive to do so, are not known. So that makes it more difficult. Obviously, in a situation like that, it's not easy to uncover, especially when the incident happened more than 10 years ago, such a long time. It's not easy to uncover who was behind it, right? But in this case, you have the identities of the officers already.
Yes.
There were 5 of them.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying that they were responsible for the killing or not. I can't say that. But you can, now what needs to be done is to investigate their roles, and even that, their roles are also known, to a certain extent, who did the investigation, who questioned who took over, and so on. So in those circumstances, you have a situation where, like I said earlier, when a person comes into custody, okay, whether you arrest him or not, there are certain times when he can be constructively arrested, even if you don't put a handcuff on hands, you know, him being in custody is already an arrest. So in this case, you have a person who you have brought in for questioning for purposes of, and Teo Beng Hok was a witness.
Yes.
So he wasn't a suspect. I think, you know, so he was brought in as a witness to assist investigations into the case that they were investigating then. So how is it that you know, the next day he's found on the balcony? Something must have gone wrong. You already know who the people are. They must know something. So, you know, the evidence, like you said, in excess of 100 over witnesses, people who were there, cleaners. There was another person who was also being questioned the same night, Tan Boon Hwa. You know, all these people gave statements. So it's not difficult to find out what actually happened. I think that's my personal view.
Evidence is already there.
Yes, exactly.
Actually, for me, I you know, the fact that they have reopened investigation under a much lower provision of the law is just shocking, because this is something that you expect to happen, you know, in the previous administration, not something that you would expect to take place now, because your starting point now is wrongful confinement, when that is very far from what the Court of Appeal has said. So that's quite shocking. In fact, I think it's the police and the AGC who should be in the hot seat answering this question.
That's true.
Wrongful confinement, of course, is ridiculous. I think that has to be made very clear. You know, he might have been wrongfully confined, fair enough, you know, but I think that's not...
it's more than that.
Yeah, of course it's more than that.
Definitely
Of course it's
more
more
than
than that. And I think, you know, the Attorney General would have to explain. But at the end of the day, the investigative agency is the police. You know, the Attorney General receives the investigation results from the police. In Teo Beng Hok's case, not so much even the MACC, because it's the police who investigate the MACC as well. So, you know, it's the police who must come up with the evidence. You know, and if you're going to suggest it's a 342 case, wrongful confinement only, I think it's an insult to the judgment of the Court of Appeal as well.
Okay, so, but what do you think is the obstacle, or, you know, why things are in this state of affair that, you know, it's reopening the case under 342? Is there an obstacle? Obstacle towards finding the truth, towards, you know, punishing whoever, or bring them to justice, whoever that's actually culpable for his death, for Beng Hok's death?
Well, I don't know whether there are any obstacles. I mean, but certainly what I can say is that, you know, perhaps there's no cooperation from the investigative bodies, the police. I mean, let's just be frank about it. Perhaps they are not, you know, giving the Attorney General what he needs. So I think there must be that, you know, like, cover-ups do happen in this country. I'm not saying there's a cover-up here, but a lot of people are suspicious that there was one.
Okay, we do have a question from one of our audience. His name is Tak Seong. So, is there a way to investigate or a system to battle the cover-up? I think this is like what you have mentioned earlier, like the Nigerian case, an independent body to investigate. Maybe we can actually discuss on this. Who should be investigating, and how should we actually monitor or these people who are investigating to make sure that, you know, they are doing the right thing?
Well, I'm sure Melissa will have a lot of knowledge, but I'll just start off saying this, then you can perhaps continue. It's the IPCMC. That is one idea that has been, you know, that has been brought up.
Since 2005.
Yeah, you know, and I think one thing that the Pakatan government must do is to bring in the IPCMC. You know, and I think it's high time, like you say, it's been 2005, 15, 14 years, you know. The purpose of the IPCMC is to introduce an independent body to watch the police. But the problem with the IPCMC is that it only concerns the police. You know, so the IPCMC, or similar body to the IPCMC, ought to be established to scrutinize the actions of all investigative bodies, you know, such as the police, of course, MACC, immigration, like in the Nigerians case, customs, you know, all these agencies have powers to investigate. So when you have powers to investigate, you can end up abusing them. So you need an independent watchdog to watch them. That's one option.
What's your take, Melissa?
Well, as he mentioned, the IPCMC only covers the police. And I think there's a lot of confusion about this because, as I mentioned earlier, the death in custody in prison, Purushothaman, who died of TB, when the news broke out, there were many comments that said, this is why we need IPCMC, but the IPCMC doesn't cover the prison. So it would be the police who will investigate what happened at prison. We have the EAIC, as you know, and they cover, I think, about 21 agencies under them. Enforcement agencies, including, I think, the immigration, customs, and so on. So they have a lot of tasks, but I think they are understaffed and they are quite stretched in what they can do in terms of, not just in terms of power, but funding and staffing, because they cover too many agencies. And that's why a separate body for police has been repeatedly mooted, because the police force probably has the highest number of complaints against them. And I think it would be followed very closely with the immigration, and perhaps a separate body should be formed to monitor them as well. But as for the MACC, they have their own external complaints committee that you can, you know, but the appointments to this committee is also, I mean, how independent are the appointments to this committee? We cannot have a situation where
retired officers.
Yes, exactly. You are looking into complaints of your own. Then obviously, then the question of transparency and the independence of the investigation would be in question. So definitely, it's high time. Starting with the IPCMC, I think there has been good and bad news. I mean, good in a sense that the police have finally agreed to forming this. But as far as the draft bill itself, we have been repeatedly told that there is a draft bill, but where is it? You know, I think stakeholders need to be consulted on these things.
So you mentioned EAIC, the Enforcement Agency Integrity Commission. Are they like, do they have enough power? Because as far as I'm aware, they just make recommendations to the Attorney General. Is that right? Or to the police, or to...
Yeah. In this situation, they are very similar to the inquiry powers of, say, Suhakam. So they conduct an inquiry, but they don't have the power to compel witnesses, for example. So if a witness doesn't want to come forward, there's really nothing much you can do about it. Also, like you said, they make recommendations, but how far are these recommendations taken seriously? These recommendations should be tabled in Parliament, debated, you know, so that there is a pressure for the government to act on the recommendations.
That's going to take a very long time. So they can't make fact-finding. They can, but...
they can, but
it's not legally binding.
It's not binding.
And even those findings are not going to be very accurate if the witnesses don't come forward.
That's true, because you cannot compel them to attend to the hearings or the inquiries. Okay, so practically EAIC is toothless.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the main complaints about the EAIC.
So even if we have the IPCMC, it's only for police. So we still have like a whole lot of enforcement agencies who can take people into custody that might not be, you know, we cannot keep tab of them.
Yes, that's why I said, you know, I think a body similar to the IPCMC ought to be set up for the purpose of investigating all enforcement agencies which have investigative powers, such as MACC, customs even, you know, immigration, like in the Nigerians case. and their findings ought to have the force of law. They ought to have bite. They must. They should carry weight. Not just mere recommendations which are just not taken seriously. So I think these are matters which need to be raised in Parliament and introduce new law. Legislation ought to be introduced giving powers to these bodies. To investigate, like Melissa said, to give them powers to compel witnesses to come forward, for example. These are all things which are necessary tools in any investigation, So if you don't have these tools, you're not going to be able to have effective investigations. So I think that's lacking at this time.
Okay. We clearly have a long way to go in terms of reforms of our institutions. So, but more importantly, there has to be political will on the part of the government to, initiate these reforms.
Okay. One thing that I really wanted to cover for the benefit of the audiences, especially the lay people, can you guys just walk us through, what is the proper procedure that the authority has to comply with when they take you into custody?
Well, actually,
we have to start from arrest.
Yes.
But in Beng Hok's case, it was constructive arrest.
No, in Beng Hok's case, like I
was
said
a
earlier,
witness.
he was a witness. So, like for example, like in a normal case where a suspect is arrested, a person who's suspected of having committed a crime, they will have to produce him in court within 24 hours to get a remand order, for however many days that they are going to keep him, and then so there is some sort of court involvement, right? So that person technically has the right to complain to the magistrate. Like for example, if he's been assaulted in prison, or if he's not well, he has some ailment, he needs medical attention. So these things can be brought to the attention of the magistrate who can make certain orders. But in the case of a witness, the witness is just asked to come in to give a statement, and that person obviously will have to give a statement for however long they need him to be there for. But they to place him under arrest, that is a bit extreme.
However long they needed him.
Of course, I mean it has to be reasonable.
Yeah.
Of course, if they don't finish in a day, perhaps to postpone it.
Because Section 30 of MACC Act, it's also it's also a point of contention now, right? How long you can keep your witness.
Well, I mean, I've experienced situations where the witnesses have been go in the morning, come out at night, and required to come back again the next day for a few days, on end. So I think also that can be very stressful. It can put a lot of stress on the person who is being interviewed, and being investigated. You see, in Teo Beng Hok's case, there was some talk of suicide.
Yes.
Which again, is also something which the Court of Appeal sort of ruled out. But there was, some suggestion that he was driven to suicide.
Yes.
You see, even assuming that's the case, and I'm not saying that's the case, I don't find that convincing, but even assuming that's the case, the point is he wouldn't have committed suicide if he wasn't driven to it. Right? So something must have driven him to commit suicide. I'm just speaking, hypothetically now. So that could have come from the pressure of, of that investigation process. I'm not saying.
Yes, I know.
I'm not convinced that of the suicide theory at all in Teo Beng Hok's case, but that shows that in other cases, there are this sort of pressure can be quite serious, quite severe, on witnesses who are being investigated.
And also, this also goes back to what you have mentioned earlier about the responsible of the custodian. You owe them a duty of care. You cannot put them in a situation that they are so pressured until, it's another form of brutality.
Yeah, I mean, the custodian, I mean, you've got to have, there must be standards, that are set standards which put in place so that we can follow them. I think we don't have those standards at this point of time. It's just anything goes, you know. So a lot of things that we don't know that happens behind closed doors during the investigation process. So reform, I think, is sorely needed, you know, when it comes to the investigation process.
But interestingly, I wanted to raise this because in some of the comments, especially when I was reading some of the comments online, right, when people talk about Beng Hok's case, they would say that the family was already compensated with the civil claim. Personally, I don't think that is enough, but I don't know, maybe because you guys, both of you, have actually dealt with a lot of family. Do you think the compensation made through civil claim is actually enough for all these people who has went through all this anguish?
I don't think, I mean, in Teo Beng Hok's case at least, I don't think they're interested. It's not the money that has motivated them to pursue this. You know, but the point is this, you know, they have a right to pursue a civil claim.
Yes,
I mean,
that's
that you can't deny them that right. And, you know, any suggestion, like in Teo Beng Hok's case, I think there were some suggestions that, you know, they've taken the money, what more do they want, and so on. It's not a question of what more do they want, it's what they're entitled to, you know. And they're not asking for anything more that they're entitled to. So as far as the civil case is concerned, you know, they're entitled to settle it without prejudice. And what that means is that it's not, it does not affect the other, the criminal side of investigation. So, you know, if the civil case is settled, it doesn't mean that the criminal case is settled as well. You can't settle a criminal case anyway.
Yes.
So when they accepted that settlement, they shouldn't be construed as oh, you have got what you want and, you know, you should stop pursuing the matter. I think that's very unfair.
How did they come out to the amount of 600,000?
No, that was I think negotiations that were carried out between parties.
But is there anything in law that says, you know, how much you will be compensated when a life is lost?
This is normally assessed by the court. And, you know, in Teo Beng Hok's case, I mean, it's simple. You have the right to pursue justice in whatever way that is available to you, whether it's a civil suit, whether it's through a criminal action. You cannot put a price on a life that has been lost at the hands of the authorities. And if you, to claim that, you know, oh, you have gotten money, so, you know, therefore you can't pursue the criminal action and, you know, you can't hold individuals responsible for his tragic death, you're just cheapening your action and you are basically shirking off responsibility because you think that the government coffers will pay off the family and you are off the hook. Where is the sense of responsibility then, you know, coming from on the part of the authorities, you know?
And it's only through bringing those who are the perpetrators accountable for whatever that have done that could prevent anything in future, similar incident in future.
Yes, and the family can only obtain closure if the perpetrators are brought to justice, and that can only be done if they are held criminally liable through an investigation.
Wow.
It's very separate, you know, the civil and the criminal aspects are very different from each other. So just because you have you managed to settle the civil case, it does not have any bearing whatsoever on the criminal aspect of it. I think that must be made very clear.
A decade has passed since Beng Hok's passing, right? How close do you think we are to the truth? Especially, you know, after what have transpired, you know, Lim Guan Eng has said a lot of things like, you know, we should investigate, and now the AG is re-investigating.
Of course, you know, I think people like Lim Guan Eng have been very concerned,
yes.
you know, with this whole thing. The DAP has been, you know, as you know, has been very involved in the Teo Beng Hok case right from day one. And of course, we all want to know what happened, you know, on this day 10 years ago, you know, and how close are we to the truth? I think, like Melissa suggested just now, the evidence is already there. You know, the evidence is already, you've had an inquiry with 100 over witnesses. I think the truth is already known. It's just not out yet.
It's just a matter of holding those individuals to, you know, to account. The facts are there.
100 over witnesses, and it's not only and you had expert witnesses who have given evidence with regard to his injuries to the neck. How do you explain all that? So, I mean, all these things are very suggestive of foul play, and that's exactly what the Court of Appeal said. So, I think that's the truth. At least the truth is there was foul play. Now we need to go further and find out who was responsible for it. I think that's where we are at this point of time.
So you can't tell me like a date or a time that you think we can finally know when the answer is, the truth.
Well, it's hard to say. I think it's not easy for me to, to put a date on it.
Okay, so in the case of either Beng Ho or many victims of who were found dead in custody, what can the public do about this? On the issues of death in custody, what can the public do?
I think one way which we have been doing for a long time is bringing media attention to these cases, because it's only through the media attention and the public knowing that there are abuse of power happening to people who cannot defend themselves. It's only through this way that the authorities will be more cautious, and I think this is what is contributing, especially in all the death in custody cases that we have handled. It's only through the media attention that has been put on it that the authorities are more cautious and they are pressured to answer what actually happened. They can't hide behind a veil of cover up, because the public, when they know more and they know that things, when the rule of law is not being followed, then they'll be demanding answers as to why things are happening and why laws are not being followed by the authorities themselves. So I think that's quite key in terms of bringing to light all these issues. Public awareness and media advocacy is very important.
Do you think public in general are less concerned about death in custody?
I think when it comes to police brutality, there is that shock value, and people are horrified. How could you do this to someone? But there is some lack of apathy when it comes to diseases, because I think the general attitude and even on the part of the detaining authorities, say prison wardens, for example, there is the attitude that, oh, if you died of an illness, it's not so shocking and not so serious. It's not a case of where you were beaten up and there was violence. So I mean, there's a lack of apathy when it comes to illnesses that needs to be addressed.
What do you think? Is there anything else that we can do for Beng Ho as public?
I think continue with the pressure. You have the bodies such as the Teo Beng Hok Trust for Democracy. They have been they've been what they've been doing is very commendable. They have been keeping the issue alive, and it's also important to note that they are not only solely concerned with the Teo Beng Hok case. They are concerned with all death in custody cases. So you have bodies like that, which are dedicated to the cause of exposing these problems. And I think this is one thing that we can do, to support such bodies, NGOs, who champion these causes. The public, of course, should also, if you see, I think a lot of times when it comes to police brutality, not only death in custody cases, just when a person gets arrested, he goes to lockup, a lot of them get beaten up. This is something which we all hear stories of, but a lot of the people are afraid to report it. They fear the consequences of reporting the assaults that they experience when they're in the lockup. So I think we should provide easier access, more discreet access, to such complainants, so that these cases come out more publicly in the future. So yes, when it comes to how the public can help, they should also come forward, with their complaints as much as possible, so that we can take it up further.
Is it safe to complain?
safe to complain. Like I
Some
said,
people might not feel like, safe to lodge complaint against the police, against the authority.
like I said, people are afraid to do so. So I think they're afraid that of the consequences that may befall that may happen. So I think what we need, the government needs to look into, is to create discrete avenues of complaint. Complaint procedures, so that to encourage people who have gone through these abuses to come forward.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a good place to end our to conclude our discussion today. Thank you so much
Thank you
both
very
for
much.
your time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Death in custody is something that should not be taken lightly. As many of these state agencies, I think the least that we expect from them is actually to be law-abiding, and only then we can entrust them, the nation, our beloved nation. Good night, till we see you again.